Police in the United States are widening their investigation into the motive of Cole Thomas Allen, the Californian man arrested in the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Association dinner. The 31-year-old sent a message to family members minutes before the attack, criticising the Trump administration and saying he wanted to target members of the government, quote, from the highest ranking to the lowest. Later on today, he is expected to appear in court where he'll be formally charged. With more details for us from Washington, here's our correspondent there, Fraser Jackson.
Authorities are looking at this note, this manifesto, which the alleged shooter, is said to have sent in the moments before this attack took place, in which Donald Trump said was filled with anti-Christian rhetoric. Now, the White House said that 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen had a tendency to make radical statements as he became involved in left-wing activism in Los Angeles, where he also acquired firearms and began regularly practicing at a firing range. And that talk soon turned to action, however, as it's believed the shooter then boarded a train in LA and traveled to Chicago and then on to DC, where he checked into the hotel in DC where the dinner was taking place last night. His manifesto that authorities are currently combing through said that he was targeting administration officials from the highest ranking to the lowest ranking. But interestingly, though, it did not include Kash Patel, who, of course, is the director of the FBI and incidentally was sat directly behind me at the dinner last night. But the investigation into a motive for this is ongoing. He is expected to be arraigned in court here in DC on Monday on firearms charges, including using a firearm against a federal officer and also using a firearm during a crime of violence as well.
Fraser Jackson for us there. Well, prior to the Correspondents' dinner, Trump had already survived assassination twice. In this next report, France 24's Charlotte Lamb looks for us at how Americans today are digesting this latest act of political violence.
The morning after a man tried to storm the White House Correspondents' dinner, the scene outside the hotel is relatively calm. Media remains in place, passers-by stop to take photos, and security is still highly visible. But there's a lingering sense of unease.
This is kind of crazy that we've had so many political violence in this country.
This keeps happening. There's unfortunately one of these times, unfortunately, something is very, very bad is going to happen if we continue to have these types of attacks on political leaders.
Experts say there has been an increase in political violence in the US over recent years, with many pointing to an increasingly polarised country where political rhetoric has become more divisive and violent in nature, and at times fuelled by disinformation. A notable rise has been seen in the years since the 2020 election, including the insurrection of Capitol Hill on January 6 the following year. Since then, a series of high-profile attacks has followed. The killings of Minnesota lawmakers Melissa Hortman and John Hoffman. The attempted murder of Paul Pelosi, husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Multiple attempted assassinations of Donald Trump during his 2024 campaign. And the killing of political activist Charlie Kirk.
Are you concerned about political violence?
Moments after Saturday night's incident, President Trump stood before reporters and acknowledged the risks of his role while calling for unity.
Nobody told me this was such a dangerous profession. If Marco would have told me, maybe I wouldn't have run. Maybe I would have said, I'll take a pass.
The California teacher and engineer accused of attempting to storm Saturday's gala believed it was his duty to target Trump administration officials, according to a note he sent family members minutes before the attack. Cole Thomas Allen is due to appear in court Monday.
Well, as we keep talking about political violence in the United States, I'm pleased then to welcome to the programme Eric Lisann. He's a lawyer and he's a former US Federal Prosecutor as well. And thank you for joining us on the programme today. Look, as we saw in that report, as viewers will know, this is not the first time that Trump has been targeted by a fellow American. What stands out to you after this latest attempted attack?
Well, the sense of normalcy, almost an inevitability that seems to pervade everybody. The society, the country has gotten used to gunfire attacks in schools, which have never been stopped, never been abated. And now it seemingly inevitably has turned to the political arena as well. So, and then more concerningly, even perhaps, is the fact that these have become weaponized. The attacks are used by Trump and others to launch a criticism of the media itself and to launch a criticism of the nature of criticism. So it becomes a way to fuel rhetoric to suppress dissent. And those seem to be the most concerning trends that we're seeing right now.
Look, and as we saw in our report, it's not just Trump who's come under attack. There were those deadly attacks on the Minnesota lawmakers last year, the killing of Charlie Kirk, the attempted killing of the husband of Nancy Pelosi. So it does seem these targeted political attacks are on the rise. How can we account for that? What do you think's driving it?
Well, definitely, as your report itself, which was actually an excellent piece there, just mentioned, the rise of the rhetoric has coincided exactly with the rise of Trump, and he's been a primary agent behind it. Even saying that is somewhat controversial in right-wing circles and in Trumpist circles, because they like to point to there's attacks from the other side as well, and whenever there is one, this is cited as somehow evidence that there's some sort of unifying movement behind it. We have this ridiculous designation of a vague group called Antifa as a designated terrorist organization, for example, a domestic terrorist organization, as an example of something that is somehow part of a organized, nefarious, actual thing that is out there targeting Trump and like-minded individuals. But the reality is that from the moment Trump entered the campaign trail in 2015, he actually, even at his rallies, was urging violence against protesters, and he's never stopped doing that. It culminated in many ways on January 6th with a violent uprising, and there was testimony that Trump himself was aware that people were bringing weapons to the rallies that day in support of him, and that he did not want devices such as magnetometers used against to take weapons away from those people, because he felt those people were there for him. And indeed, later on at the Capitol, it developed exactly as he seemingly had planned. And he was never prosecuted for that, for a number of reasons: the fecklessness of the prosecutorial regime that followed him, the intransigence of the Supreme Court, the unwillingness of the Supreme Court to allow a case against him to go forward. All of these things have combined to bring us to this moment where we are in society right now. And behind it all, let's not forget, it's very, very easy to obtain guns in the United States. This is one of the distinguishing features of American society vis-a-vis other countries and other democracies around the world, which is the ease with which guns can be obtained and the justification which is used, which has developed in really the last couple decades or so, that this is constitutionally protected activity under the Second Amendment, and in a way that that Second Amendment is interpreted much more aggressively and expansively than it had been in the first 200 and some years of the country's existence. And even saying that is a controversial position, but there's a tremendous amount of evidence to support that. So the combination of these factors makes it very difficult to stop incidents like these from happening.
I'd like to get your thoughts on the case against Cole Thomas Allen as well, given that you are yourself a former prosecutor. Help us understand the legal process, if you can. We know he is, for one, to appear in court today.
Yes, exactly. Today will be the beginning of the proceedings, and in some ways it's just a formality to make sure that there's charges justifying his continued detention. There'll be a decision on whether he should remain in detention. There'll be efforts to make sure that he has an attorney appointed for him, and that if he wants to retain one himself, that he understands how to do that, and that if he can't retain one for himself, one will be appointed for him. There's an office specifically designated for that called the Office of the Federal Defender that will assist defendants charged in federal court in the District of Columbia as he is now. In fact, in this exact location where this shooting took place, there was a shooting of Ronald Reagan, which killed and wounded other people back in 1981 at the exact same hotel, right outside that hotel. And that individual, John Hinckley Jr., was brought to trial. And very interestingly, that case resulted in a verdict of not guilty for lack of the mental capacity to form criminal responsibility, which did result in him nonetheless being confined for over 20 years after that. But it was with a objective of reforming his mental health. This case here, it's very early, so we don't know what the mental situation was of this particular defendant. Even the law around criminal responsibility in this kind of a case has changed somewhat. So we'll see what kind of a defense he wants to put forward. But it could be a case, and it almost certainly will be a case, that will lead to the potential of very, very serious charges. And given the proclivities of this particular Justice Department, as directed by Donald Trump, it may even be a death penalty case. They may seek to impose the death penalty here by bringing charges that have as a possible sanction the death penalty. If they want to call it some sort of domestic terrorism, an attempted political assassination, if there is evidence to support that, that could be one possible outcome.
All right, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you so much, Eric Lisann, for us there. Well, despite that shooting in Washington, King Charles's state visit to the United States is going ahead as planned. The UK monarch will be touching down in Washington later on today for a 4-day trip that includes a private meeting with President Trump and an address to the US Congress. France 24's Nick Rushworth now looks ahead to the visit and the particular challenges it will pose to Charles with the special relationship not quite what it once was.
King Charles's 4-day state visit to the United States goes ahead despite a shooting at a White House dinner on Saturday and with several tasks, including maintaining close ties with the current US president.
We're going to have a great time, and he represents his nation like nobody else can do it.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Another task will be to live up to his mother's legacy, with Charles III to give a speech to Congress, knowing his mother reigned as monarch during 14 US presidencies. Her last visit to the United States was in 2007.
Administrations in your country and governments in mine may come and go, but talk we will, listen we have to. Disagree from time to time we may, but united we must always remain.
It is 250 years since US independence. Ties now are strained amid differences over the war with Iran.
What's your assessment on
the UK ambassador to the United States was asked about that, speaking to Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation.
So it's difficult in Tehran. There are clearly some divisions. You pointed to that initial disagreement before the war, but since then, Margaret, actually the UK has been doing a lot.
What a beautiful accent, too. I'd like to have that.
The current UK ambassador to the United States is a replacement for Peter Mandelson, who is linked to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson's appointment has cast a shadow over the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The Epstein files concern the King's brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Certain US lawmakers want the former prince to give evidence to Congress about his relationship with Epstein. Charles, as a constitutional monarch, has little room for maneuver in trying to get the so-called special relationship back on track.